The day I signed away my father's legacy started like any other. Clear autumn morning, coffee brewing, sunlight streaming through office windows. Richard, my stepfather, sat behind his mahogany desk wearing that confident smile I'd come to trust. "Just a formality, Harper," he said, sliding a stack of papers across the polished wood. "Tax restructuring. Your father's shares will be better managed this way. Trust me." I was 19 years old, grieving, completely lost without Dad, who died just 6 months earlier in a car accident that still felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Mom sat beside me, squeezing my hand, nodding encouragement. She trusted Richard completely. He'd swept into our shattered lives 2 years after Dad's death, charming, capable, promising to take care of everything we couldn't handle. I picked up the pen. My hand shook slightly, but I told myself it was just paperwork, just formalities. Richard's smile widened as he collected the signed documents, patting my shoulder like a proud father. "You've made the right choice," he assured me. "Your father would be proud." I wanted so desperately to believe him. I needed to believe someone had things under control. Walking out of that office, I actually felt relieved, like a burden had been lifted from my shoulders. I had no idea I'd just handed over my entire inheritance. 42% of Sullivan Industries, the tech manufacturing company Dad built from absolutely nothing. Dad was my hero, my whole world. He started Sullivan Industries in our garage when I was 5, building circuit boards by hand, dreaming of something bigger. I'd sit on his workbench, watching him solder connections with those steady hands, listening as he explained how electricity flowed like water through pipes. By the time I was 10, Sullivan Industries employed 200 people. By 15, it was a major supplier for electronics manufacturers across 3 states. Dad never forgot where he came from. He kept that original workbench in his executive office, a reminder that success came from hard work, not shortcuts. He taught me everything: how to read financial statements, how to treat employees with respect, how to spot quality components. "Harper," he'd say, "this company will be yours someday. Learn it from the ground up." Then came that Tuesday night, a wet road, a truck that ran a red light. Dad was gone instantly. Mom and I were shattered. Richard appeared at Dad's funeral, a business associate offering condolences. He was polished, sympathetic, exactly what Mom needed in that moment. He handled logistics she couldn't face, organized meals, fielded calls from the company. He became indispensable. Within months, they were dadding. Within a year, married. I tried to be happy for Mom. She deserved companionship, and Richard seemed devoted. Richard took immediate interest in Sullivan Industries. "Your father built something remarkable," he'd tell me over dinner. "But the business world has changed. We need modern strategies, professional management." At 17, I was focused on school and processing grief. I trusted Mom's judgment. By the time I turned 18, Richard had convinced Mom to give him a management role. By 19, when he asked me to sign those papers, he'd already consolidated significant control. Looking back, every move was calculated. Every kindness had purpose. The first sign something was wrong came 3 months after I signed. I stopped by company headquarters, wanting to visit Dad's old office. Mrs. Chen, the receptionist who'd known me since childhood, looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Harper. That area is restricted now. Mr. Richard's orders." Restricted? In my father's company? I texted Richard asking to meet for lunch. He replied hours later, "Swamped with meetings, another time." That became his standard response. Suddenly, he was always too busy to see me. I started researching online, looking up company filings. The language was dense, but I found something that made my blood run cold. A transfer of shares from Harper Sullivan to Richard Chen Sullivan. 42%, my inheritance. I confronted Mom that night. She looked confused. "Tax restructuring, sweetheart. Richard explained it all. Your shares are in a trust now." But the documents didn't mention any trust. I contacted a lawyer who agreed to review the paperwork for a modest fee. Watching her read through the documents, I saw her expression shift from neutral to troubled. Harper, this isn't restructuring. This is a complete transfer of ownership. You signed away your shares to Richard. There's no trust, no protection, nothing. My stomach dropped. Can we undo it? She winced. You were 19, legally an adult. You signed voluntarily. Unless we can prove coercion or fraud, this transfer is binding. Legal action would be expensive, lengthy, and not guaranteed to succeed. I left her office feeling hollowed out. Richard had played me perfectly. He'd waited until I was vulnerable, positioned himself as trustworthy, then struck. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't undo what I'd done, but I could become smarter, harder, more strategic. I enrolled in business school, focusing on corporate law and finance. My professors found me intense, driven. I studied obsessively, devouring case studies about hostile takeovers, shareholder disputes, corporate fraud. I learned the language of power. Meanwhile, Richard transformed Sullivan Industries. He rebranded it as Chen Sullivan Technologies, erasing Dad's name from prominence. He replaced department heads with his own people. He cut costs aggressively, laying off long-time employees who'd been with Dad from the beginning. Mom defended him constantly. Business is tough, Harper. Richard is doing what's necessary. But former employees contacted me, sharing their experiences. How Richard had eliminated pension contributions. How safety standards were being relaxed to save money. How the culture Dad built, one of respect and craftsmanship, was dying. I started documenting everything. Every complaint, every questionable decision, every deviation from Dad's principles. I created spreadsheets, tracked timelines, built a dossier. Knowledge was power. During my sophomore year, I interned at a corporate investigations firm. The work was meticulous, reviewing financial records, tracking paper trails, interviewing witnesses. My supervisor, Marcus, a retired FBI agent, took interest in my intensity. During lunch one day, he asked, "What are you really after, Harper?" I hesitated, then told him everything. About Dad, about Richard, about my stolen inheritance. Marcus listened without interrupting. "You want advice," he finally said. "Revenge is expensive and often unsatisfying, but accountability, that's different. That's about justice." He taught me how to investigate properly, how to obtain records legally, how to identify red flags in financial statements, how to build a timeline that would stand up in court. I applied these lessons to Richard's management, working nights and weekends. I obtained public filings, interviewed former employees, tracked contracts and expenditures. A pattern emerged. Richard was systematically bleeding the company, transferring assets to shell corporations, preparing for something big. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Jenny, Dad's former executive assistant, contacted me through Facebook. She'd been one of Richard's first terminations. "I kept copies," she told me over coffee, her hands trembling. "Before Richard fired me, I backed up files, emails, memos, financial documents. Your father was always good to me. I couldn't let everything disappear." She handed me a thumb drive. "I don't know if it helps, but it's yours if you want it." That thumb drive was gold. Internal emails showing Richard's plans before he even married Mom. Communications with business associates discussing asset acquisition strategies. Financial projections treating Sullivan Industries like a target to be gutted and sold. There were emails to Mom, carefully worded to manipulate her perspective, to isolate me, to position himself as the sole authority. He'd engineered everything, and here was the proof. I showed Marcus. He whistled low. "This changes things, but Harper, you need to be smart about how you proceed." I graduated with honors. Richard attended the ceremony and gave me an expensive watch as a gift, inscribed with, "To Harper, who learned the value of patience." The irony wasn't lost on me. He thought I'd given up, moved on, accepted my fate. He had no idea I'd spent 4 years preparing for what came next. I accepted a position at a corporate law firm specializing in shareholder disputes. I learned how boardrooms really worked, how power was exercised, how corporate warfare was waged. I also began investing, building capital slowly. Every dollar I earned, I reinvested. I lived modestly, saved aggressively, planned meticulously. Richard occasionally asked about my work. I kept answers vague. Corporate law, pretty dry stuff. He'd nod, satisfied that I was pursuing a separate life, no longer interested in Sullivan Industries. 2 years into my law career, I made my first strategic move. I began quietly purchasing Sullivan Industries shares from minority shareholders. Not enough to trigger disclosure requirements, but enough to build leverage. I used shell companies, kept transactions small and scattered. Nobody noticed a pattern. Richard certainly didn't. I also cultivated relationships with key industry figures, suppliers, clients, competitors. I attended conferences, joined professional organizations, built a network. People began associating me with my father's legacy rather than Richard's management. At an industry dinner, I sat next to an executive named Tom who'd done business with Dad for decades. "Your father was the most ethical man I knew," Tom said. "Richard's nothing like him. We're looking for alternatives." I saw my opening. What if Sullivan Industries could return to those standards? Would you give us another chance? Tom studied me carefully. Under different management, absolutely, but Richard's dug in pretty deep. "Not as deep as he thinks," I replied. That's when I realized I didn't just want my shares back. I wanted Richard gone completely, and I was willing to play the long game to make it happen. I began meeting secretly with former Sullivan Industries employees, the ones Richard had dismissed or forced out. They were angry, hurt, eager for vindication. Together, we formed an informal alliance. I compiled everything into a master file: financial irregularities, safety violations, employee mistreatment, declining quality metrics. It painted a damning picture of Richard's leadership. But I still needed the right moment. Richard had the board's support, Mom's trust, legal ownership of shares. I needed to wait for him to make a mistake. That mistake came sooner than expected. Richard announced plans to take Chen Sullivan Technologies public. An IPO would unlock tremendous value, he explained at a family dinner. Mom seemed excited. I kept my face neutral. "Congratulations," I said. "That's quite an achievement." He beamed, not noticing the calculation behind my smile. Going public meant scrutiny, regulatory filings, audits, disclosure requirements. It meant Richard's house of cards would be examined by experts whose job was finding problems. I contacted Marcus immediately. "He's going public. This is our chance." Over the following months, I orchestrated a careful campaign. Nothing traceable, nothing illegal, just information flowing to people who'd use it properly. A business journalist received an anonymous package containing documentation of safety violations. An industry analyst got financial projections showing unsustainable debt levels. The SEC received detailed complaints about questionable accounting practices. Separately, each tip might have been dismissed. Together, they created a pattern impossible to ignore. The IPO process ground to a halt. Underwriters requested additional documentation. Auditors flagged irregularities requiring explanation. The SEC opened a preliminary inquiry. Richard grew increasingly stressed. He snapped at Mom, worked longer hours, looked haggard at family dinners. "It's just jealous competitors," he insisted. "People trying to sabotage our success." But the problems were real, and they weren't going away. Mom noticed his behavior changing. "Is Richard okay?" she asked me one evening. "He seems so stressed." "IPOs are complicated," I said carefully. "Maybe the timing isn't right." The IPO was canceled. Richard blamed market conditions, but everyone in the industry knew due diligence had uncovered too many problems. Richard's response was desperate. He began shopping the company to private equity firms, hoping to cash out before things deteriorated further. But word had spread. I made sure every potential buyer received comprehensive information about the company's problems. Anonymous packages, untraceable communications, detailed documentation. Nothing illegal, just truth delivered strategically. Meanwhile, I continued buying shares from frustrated minority investors. People were losing faith in Richard's leadership, willing to sell at discounts. My ownership stake grew steadily. Richard didn't notice. He was too busy trying to save himself. One evening, Mom called me, voice strained. "Harper, can we talk privately?" We met at a coffee shop. She looked older, tired. "I've been reviewing some financial documents," she said quietly. "Things Richard has said don't match what I'm seeing. Can you help me understand?" This was the moment I'd been preparing for. "Mom, what exactly did you find?" She showed me documents, bank statements, company filings, investment records. She'd started questioning Richard's explanations, doing her own research. "He told me the company was thriving," she said, "but these numbers suggest something different, and Harper, I found something else." She pulled out a copy of the papers I'd signed at 19. "These aren't trust documents. This is a share transfer. Richard took your inheritance." I watched her process the realization, saw the moment understanding turn to horror. "Mom, I know. I've known for years." Her face crumpled. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Would you have believed me? You trusted Richard completely. You loved him." She was silent for a long moment. "What else don't I know?" I told her everything. The manipulation, the company's decline, the evidence I'd gathered, my strategic campaign to expose him. She listened, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I let him fool me. I chose him over you." "He fooled both of us," I said gently. "But Mom, I need your help now. Together we can fix this. We can take back what's ours." She looked at me, scared but determined. "Tell me what to do." Mom became my partner in the final phase. She had access Richard couldn't block, joint accounts, company documents, internal communications. She began gathering evidence systematically, documenting everything. One discovery shocked us both, a prenuptial agreement Mom didn't remember signing. Richard had slipped it into a stack of papers during their wedding planning. The prenup gave Richard everything in case of divorce. "He planned this from the beginning," Mom said, voice hollow. "He married me to get the company." I squeezed her hand. "Yes, but that agreement works both ways. It proves premeditation. It shows intent to defraud." We retained the best divorce lawyer in the state, a formidable woman named Catherine who specialized in complex asset cases. After reviewing our evidence, she smiled grimly. "This is one of the most clear-cut fraud cases I've seen. Richard won't just lose assets, he could face criminal charges." Mom hesitated. "I don't want vindictiveness, I just want justice." Catherine nodded. "Justice is what we'll pursue." We filed for divorce on a Monday morning. The papers included detailed allegations of fraud, manipulation, and theft. We simultaneously filed complaints with the SEC, State Attorney General, and Civil Court. Richard received the papers at his office. According to witnesses, he went pale, then purple with rage. He immediately called Mom, shouting about betrayal and conspiracy. Mom, following Catherine's instructions, didn't answer. She'd moved into a hotel, changed her phone number, cut off all direct contact. Richard tried reaching me next. I let it go to voicemail. His message was rambling, angry, threatening legal action if we didn't drop the ridiculous allegations. I saved the voicemail. More evidence. The board of Chen Sullivan Technologies convened an emergency meeting. Richard had lost credibility. The failed IPO, the divorce filing with its fraud allegations, the regulatory inquiries. Directors demanded answers. I attended as a shareholder. I'd accumulated enough shares to require notice of meetings. Richard couldn't exclude me. The meeting was tense. Richard tried to maintain authority, dismissing the allegations as personal vendetta. But the board had hired independent investigators. Their preliminary findings corroborated our claims. One director, a man who'd known my father, addressed Richard directly. "These allegations suggest systematic fraud. The board needs to consider suspending your management authority pending investigation." Richard exploded. "This company is mine. I built it into what it is today." "You destroyed what Michael Sullivan built," the director replied coldly, "and we're done enabling it." The vote was swift. Richard's management authority was suspended. Security revoked his building access. He was escorted from the boardroom, shouting threats and accusations. I sat silently through it all, feeling not triumph but exhaustion. Richard hired aggressive lawyers who filed countersuits claiming defamation and conspiracy. They demanded access to my communications, my financial records, everything. Catherine was ready. "Let them. Discovery goes both ways. We'll get access to Richard's records too." The legal battle was brutal. Depositions, document production, expert witnesses. Richard fought every step, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. The SEC investigation intensified. Federal investigators interviewed employees, reviewed financial records, built a case. Criminal charges became likely. Mom struggled. She'd loved Richard, believed in him. Accepting that he'd used her was devastating. She started therapy, worked through guilt and shame, slowly rebuilt her sense of self. One evening, she told me, "I keep thinking I should have known. The signs were there." "He was a professional con artist," I replied. "This is what he does. You're not responsible for his choices." 18 months after filing for divorce, we reached a settlement. Richard agreed to return all stolen shares, my 42% plus portions he'd fraudulently acquired from other shareholders. He surrendered all positions at Sullivan Industries. He accepted a divorce judgment that left him virtually nothing. In exchange, Mom and I agreed not to pursue criminal charges. It was pragmatic. A trial would be expensive, exhausting, and uncertain. Richard's reputation was already destroyed. He'd never work in the industry again. The day the settlement was finalized, Catherine shook my hand. "You've won completely. Richard is finished." But I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, relieved, ready to move on. Richard left town immediately. I heard through industry contacts he'd moved to another state, trying to start a consulting business. But his name triggered instant Google results about fraud and manipulation. No one would hire him. Mom and I stood in the parking lot after signing final papers. "What now?" she asked. "Now," I said, "we rebuild." Taking control of Sullivan Industries felt surreal. The board appointed me interim CEO, despite my young age, recognizing my knowledge of Dad's vision and my role in exposing Richard's fraud. The company was damaged. Demoralized employees, angry customers, depleted resources. Fixing it would require years of work. I assembled a team of Dad's former trusted advisors. We rebranded immediately. Chen Sullivan Technologies became Sullivan Industries again. We redesigned the logo to match Dad's original. We republished company values: integrity, quality, respect. The response was overwhelming. Former employees asked to return. Longtime customers gave us second chances. Suppliers offered better terms, wanting to support the resurrection. Slowly, metrics improved, quality increased, customer satisfaction rose, revenue stabilized, then grew. One afternoon, an older machinist named Tom approached me. He'd worked for Dad since the company's early days. "Your father would be proud," Tom said simply. "You brought his vision back." That meant more than any profit report. Mom found her purpose in helping others avoid what she'd experienced. She established a foundation focused on educating people about financial fraud, manipulation tactics, and protecting vulnerable individuals. She spoke publicly about her experience, no longer ashamed but determined to help others. "I was a target because I was grieving," she explained at events. "Predators look for vulnerability, but you can recover, you can rebuild." Her courage inspired me. Our relationship, strained during Richard's reign, became stronger than ever. We had dinner weekly, talked about everything, supported each other's healing. 3 years after reclaiming Sullivan Industries, I decided to make Richard's downfall complete. Not through further legal action, that was finished, but through ensuring his reputation followed him everywhere. I hired a PR firm specializing in reputation management. We created a detailed website, professionally designed, well-sourced, legally bulletproof. It documented Richard's pattern of targeting grieving families, manipulating trust, stealing assets. We included court documents, witness testimonies, investigator findings. The site was optimized for search engines. Anyone Googling Richard's name would find it immediately. We also reached out to industry publications, offering exclusive interviews about corporate fraud prevention. I shared my story, not for sympathy, but as education. This happens more than people realize, I explained. Predators target vulnerable families. Here's how to protect yourself. The articles gained traction. Richard's tactics became case studies in business schools, examples of what to avoid. His name became synonymous with corporate fraud. One journalist asked, "Isn't this revenge?" "No," I replied. "Revenge is personal, this is prevention. Richard is still out there, still capable of hurting others. People deserve warning." The full scope of Richard's fraud emerged over time. Investigators discovered he'd targeted multiple families before ours, always the same pattern. Identify a successful business owner, wait for death or crisis, sweep in to help, gradually take control, strip assets, move on. We'd been his most ambitious target. Sullivan Industries was worth more than his previous victims combined. But we were also his downfall, the first who fought back successfully. Other victims contacted me after the publicity. A widow in Oregon whose late husband's construction company had been stolen. A man in Texas whose father's medical practice was bankrupted. Each story was heartbreaking, familiar. I connected them with resources, lawyers, investigators, support groups. Some pursued legal action. Others just wanted acknowledgement that they weren't alone, weren't stupid, weren't responsible for being targeted. One victim told me, "I thought I was weak for being fooled, but you fought back and won. That gives me hope." That's when I realized my victory wasn't just personal. It was proof that predators could be stopped, that victims could become survivors, that justice was possible. The website we'd created about Richard logged thousands of views monthly. His fraud became public knowledge, permanent record, warning to others. Last month I received an email from Richard. The subject line read, "You won." I stared at it for a long time before opening. The message was brief. "Harper, I understand now what I destroyed. Your father built something meaningful. I turned it into a transaction. That was wrong. You've made sure I'll never do it again. You took my reputation completely. I suppose I deserved it." I showed Mom. She read silently, then asked, "Will you respond?" I thought about it. Part of me wanted to ignore him, let him sit with his guilt. Another part recognized that acknowledgement mattered, even if it changed nothing. I wrote back, "Richard, you didn't just destroy a business. You betrayed trust, exploited grief, hurt people who'd never harmed you. The reputation you lost was one you never deserved. What I took was the mask you wore. I revealed who you really are. That's not revenge, that's truth." I hit send and closed the laptop. Standing in Dad's office, my office now, I looked at the old workbench he'd kept, the tools he'd used to build his first circuit boards. I ran my fingers over the scarred wood, feeling connected to him. "I did it, Dad," I whispered. "I protected what you built. I stopped someone who would have done this to others, and I made sure his name will warn people forever." My stepdad took my shares. I took his reputation. But more importantly, I took back my father's dream, protected future victims, and proved that predators can be stopped. That was justice, complete, permanent, and well-earned.